a particular story that might have high risk is something that you need as someone in charge of journalists to direct them towards it. Yani, I was very reluctant always, and that was a standard of my operation in Al Jazeera. When we send someone to hotspot, we give them the following, and I do that personally by sitting with every correspondent who's going to the field or a crew member, and I tell him there is nothing in my professional or my career was much more painful than informing a family of a correspondent or a colleague who dies in the field that their son or their father or their husband is dead. I have never, I've witnessed everything, but that was the most difficult thing to do, and you have to do it yourself. You cannot delegate that task to someone else. It is really very bad to phone someone and say, please, thank you very much, your son, you're the cameraman of Al Jazeera. It happened to me many times. That was the most difficult thing to do. So no one would love to see that. And this is why I always prefer for journalists, when it comes to particular incident, not to put themselves in a very risky environment. However, when it comes to the mission of going to hotspot, we need to encourage people to do so. Otherwise, we are encouraging, the story to be hidden and not to be known. And then we will be collaborators with sometimes forces that are doing a lot of crime against the humanity by not fully exposing their crime to the public.
My name is Charles Haviland from BBC News here in Sri Lanka. Thank you very much for the talk. I just wanted to ask maybe a couple of disparate things. One is if you could just enlighten us a bit more about the US-UK issue with your office in Iraq in 2004. I think it would be interesting to hear more about that. The other thing is you say that people can't be fooled by the media. You were using the examples of pre-revolution Egypt, etc. Just want to say, are you absolutely sure that surely what governments want to control media because they do feel that the media can kind of give a narrative that will be to the government's advantage, and that some populations are quite credulous in that way, in the face of a very kind of, if you like, one-sided media. I don't know if I phrased that very well, but just wanted to pick you up on your statement that populations can't be fooled.
Thank you very much. I would say that, of course, in 2004, when we received the news about the conversation that took place at the White House, we started operating. I went personally to Britain and I started meeting with people, and we had a court case even against the 10 Downing Street in order to get the memo that Daily Mirror spoke about. But that we were facing the legal situation where 10 Downing Street have the capability of blocking certain kind of information from going to the press if they classify that as sensitive. So we could not legally get the document, but we know that the document existed and we know all the story about it. I demanded an interview with Tony Blair. At that time he was the Prime Minister, and I was not given the chance to interview him, although Tony Blair was asked the same day that I was in Britain on Sky TV about this particular incident, and he did not dismiss it, but he did spoke in a way that he was, Tony Blair is very clever in avoiding answering the question. So he said, no, you know what, Al Jazeera is there and they're doing their job, and all these kind of terms that was not really answering the question. And I met him personally after that, and I had conversation with him about it, and he smiled and he said, thanks God that you are still around and no one bombed you. Simple. Until I went to America, actually. Later on, after George Bush era, I was allowed to visit the States, and I did interview some people who were present in the meeting during Obama administration, and they confirmed to me that this conversation took place between George Bush and Tony Blair in the presence of Colin Powell, the Chief of Staff. Colin Powell was the Secretary of State, and his deputy. And the fact that this story was dismissed thanks to Colin Powell, who told them, you cannot bring democracy to the Middle East by bombing the most democratic tool that the Arabs have. So this is how the story did not really, become truth. I did not. I think this is a matter that journalists in the future could explore, but definitely there was something taking place, and there was a conversation about bombing headquarters of Al Jazeera in Doha, not in Baghdad or in Kabul, in Doha. So there was something that I am sure about, and it is documented case.
From Derana, well, actually, which really what inspired me about the entire career of being a journalist, especially with Al Jazeera. My first question is as to what made you to leave Al Jazeera. And the second question is that now our part of the world still believes that, especially politicians, maybe the not necessarily the bureaucracy, but the political the setup, still believes that the Arab Spring was due to a Western creation, perhaps. But you basically said here it was actually came from the people, not by the media. I just want an answer as to what actually happened.
What made me leave Al Jazeera is two major issues. The first one is personal, related to my perception about myself. I've spent 8 years leading Al Jazeera in the most difficult circumstances, from the Iraqi war up to the Arab Spring and the aftermath. And I noticed that I have become extremely exhausted and extremely, as well, losing the enthusiasm that I had towards this particular job, which is sitting behind a desk and directing newsrooms and trying to integrate the news operation within administrative and financial circumstances. It was not easy. I have noticed that more than 80% maybe of my job is becoming actually administrative and organizational, with the expansion that Al Jazeera has gone through. We have started as one particular channel in 2003 when I took over, and we ended with more than 22 channels in various languages. The English is one of them, and we had the project of the Balkan, which is now a news channel, and there, at that time also the Turkish channel was under construction, and the Swahili channel in East Africa, plus more than 15 sport channels. The biggest now network of sport business actually is with Al Jazeera, not only regionally but even internationally. Now Al Jazeera has become major player on sport journalism. So the issue is, when the Arab Spring arrived as well, and this is the second reason, new dynamics has emerged in the region. And this dynamics is interesting and overwhelming. We did cover the story in Tunisia and on Egypt, and that was accomplished. Then we engaged in long-term coverage of Libya, Yemen, and Syria. I found that there are many issues at this stage that I need to express my opinion about. And I can never do that while I'm still in Al Jazeera, because Al Jazeera, if I was in Al Jazeera, a lot of things that I've said today, I might not be able to say, simply because you have a heavy responsibility of managing a network that you do not want to mix your personal opinion with the interest of that particular network. So, in many ways, I do believe that I had a role to play within the new circumstances in the Arab world, and I cannot do this while still in Al Jazeera, given the fact that I have already reached the point after 8 years, which I think that 8 years is more than enough for anyone in the top executive level or top political level to accomplish his vision. After that, he starts repeating himself, waking up in the morning, dragging himself to go to the office, repeating what he has done yesterday. Then he starts developing his own personal perception about his role and himself, and that might indulge him into long-term views that are really not creative or innovative or even objective. So you become very subjective. So I thought, maybe let me change the scope, and I went to establish a sharp forum, which I'm now involved in communicating with people on the ground in all the Arab Spring countries. Now, the second question that you asked, yes, the Arab world, if you think that the Americans or the British were capable of having the Arab Spring, you are really giving the Americans and the British and the West countries much more than what they deserve. Serious. I know, and you know, and everyone knows that by the end of 2010, the West was actually going into very deep crisis, economically and politically. The Americans were not able to manage their war in Afghanistan, and they were withdrawing from Iraq, and they are losing the war in Iraq. So they did not really have that magnificent horizon of establishing democracy in the Arab world. They were trying their best to live with dictatorships and to enhance relationship with Hosni Mubarak of that time and Zainul Abidin bin Ali in order to secure their transit from the region, rather than establishing a new phase of headache for them. And you know, and I know more maybe a little bit because I have been involved in the process. The first few days of revolution in Tunisia was not welcomed by the Americans or the British or the French. And every one of them came publicly to support Zainul Abidin bin Ali. And then during the revolution in Egypt, the American administration, in form of Hillary Clinton statements, and the British officials were supportive of Hosni Mubarak. And they were not really involved. Not only not involved, they were not even informed. And I know that later on, Al Jazeera English in particular became the most important channel that gives the Americans in the White House, the Pentagon, and everywhere, clues about what's happening at Tahrir Square. And they said so, and Hillary Clinton said so before the Congress, in front of the Congress. So, at all, this phenomenon that you witness in the Arab world is something organic, natural. It was unexpected, neither by the Americans nor by anyone else. And I think, the people have surprised us in a beautiful manner, and we cannot really at all ascribe this to any foreign force.
My name is Nyla, and I'm with TNL. Do you believe in ever holding a story back, or are you more in favor of a WikiLeaks-style stance of releasing everything as and when it comes? And have you ever been in a situation where you thought even temporarily suppressing a story might be better for the greater good, whatever that is?
Yes. Yeah. I will lie if I tell you no. Of course. Sometimes you do. And this is one of the harsh decisions you should take. And you should take it with responsibility for the good public, for the public good, not for your personal responsibility or the responsibility of narrow-minded group of people like governments. I know that some stories that we receive, you may not expose immediately until you make preparations for it. Otherwise, you might lead to genocides or civil wars or confrontations. I know that when I was covering the story of Iraq, for example, I received many stories that I put it in the drawer for a while until we prepared ourselves and prepared the audience for it. When you find some people killing others based on sectarian or ethnic, foundations, and you rush that story as a breaking news item on the screen without looking at the circumstances or the timing of it, you may really lead into huge ramifications and a lot of blood that you could be, triggering in a region that already very tense and might not tolerate something like that. I'll give you one example, not just to speak about theory. One day I received information that there are people, Kurds and Turkmen in Iraq have started a fight and they killed four Turkmen from the Kurdish, or 4 Kurds in Kirkuk from Turkmen group. Now, that was at night, 8 o'clock p.m. We could not send correspondence to the place because it was very dangerous. If you put that at 8 p.m. news to the public, what you will do basically, you will allow this story to evolve without contextualizing it until next day in the morning. During that night, you could, because of publishing this story, lead to some revenge from the Kurdish people against the Turkmen in other territories.